Welcome back to ThinkTech here. It's a 2 o'clock block on a given Thursday. My name is Jay Fidell. This is Military in Hawaii. It's an opportunity for us to introduce members of the military to the public and to get an idea of what's happening out there in the military. It's a huge and it's a different world in many ways, and we want to know about it. We want to know about the people in it and their careers and their lives and how they see the world. And today we're talking to Eric Marshall. He's the guy in charge of the district engineers, the Army Corps of Engineers here in Honolulu. Welcome to the show, Colonel.
Hey, thank you, Jay. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Great to have you. So I'd like to spend a minute kind of going through your career, because I was caught, and in fact, this is a question that it has been suggested that I should ask you. Is that how did you get from the Air Force Academy, which is in the air, to the Army, to the Corps of Engineers? It's a long throw. How did you do that?
Yeah, there's a long sordid history there, so I'll spare you and your listeners the full story. But that decision came early in my career, and like most young officers or maybe college students, really, we do things for two reasons: the glory and the girls. And this story involves both. I graduated from the Air Force Academy in 2002, and the World Trade Center was attacked the previous year, and so that really kind of shaped my interest in where I wanted to serve my country. I had the opportunity to do an exchange program at West Point while I was a cadet, and from there I learned about the Army work ethic, the camaraderie, and all that goes into Army service. And so that really oriented my thoughts on how I'd like to serve in the global war on terror. But something else that occurred while I was at West Point is I met my now wife. Her name is Allie, and she, that made that decision a little bit easier. Additionally, the Air Force said I couldn't fly, so I couldn't get the glory by flying planes. Something wrong with my eyes, and then there was a girl to chase after, so we can make our marriage work. So that's the story.
Was she a cadet also?
She was a cadet at West Point. She served her time honorably in the Army. So as an engineer, you can believe that.
Well, so at home, in the quiet of your home, do you talk about engineering?
All the time, actually. I mean, there's not any conversation that comes up where we don't do some type of long division or, talk about coefficients. Just kidding. She's the complete opposite of my interest. I could sit around and talk about concrete all the time, but she's more in the kind of the beauty and health industry and clean living. And so we actually have diverse interests, we'll say.
Okay, all right. I'm really interested. It's an interesting career, many aspects to it. And you spent some time in the Middle East and Iraq, Afghanistan, was it? And that had to be interesting because you weren't doing either engineering. Well, maybe you were doing engineering, but you certainly weren't. You weren't flying, and you were on the ground, and you were exposed to war there, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, my time in Iraq was early on in the fight there. I was a diver of all things in the desert. Another long sordid story, but that was a really interesting experience. It was actually my time in Afghanistan, though, where I really first started working for the Corps. I worked for the Corps of Engineers as a captain, but when I went to Afghanistan working for the Corps, I was a construction manager, and from there I worked directly with businesses, Afghan businesses, to build the capacity of the local economy and the infrastructure there. And it really was formative for me to where I'm sitting today on the importance of the industrial base to accomplish the mission of the Army Corps of Engineers. I'd love to go into more of that with you.
No, we will for sure. I'm very interested in that connection. But before we go there, I just wanted to ask you about your degree from MIT. First of all, MIT, best engineering school in the country, I think. You probably will agree to that. You took nuclear physics there, which is I know the military encourages people to take graduate degrees. It helps you on your fitness reports. It helps you on your promotions, everything. It also helps you think, graduate school helps you think, no question about it. And you had the physics to start with, from the Air Force Academy, I guess. So there was a natural progression into nuclear physics. But why nuclear physics, and what good? And did you and your wife talk about nuclear physics at the dinner table? No.
Yeah, I mean, much to her chagrin, she would wish we did not. No, so actually, we don't talk about that much anymore because as many people who've been through graduate school might say, that's something you do and you kind of dump it. And unfortunately, that kind of happened to me. As we were joking before we got on, like, if there's ever a degree that has not helped me in my life, it's that. Of course, I'm half joking. I decided to major in nuclear engineering because I could use that. It was as a base to teach at West Point. It was another assignment I had. Very fortunate. Probably the most rewarding thing I've ever done is being an assistant professor at West Point, teaching physics there. So I needed grounding in something like nuclear engineering to be qualified for that, and that's why I did it. But I mean, since then I hardly know what an isotope is anymore, and it certainly doesn't help me pouring concrete here in Hawaii, or doing environmental cleanup as we do here in Hawaii too. So a lot of those neurons have definitely been frayed, and they've been longer forming memories. There's just nothing there anymore.
Well, you could do a lateral and go from here to the Navy and go to the sub base at Pearl Harbor. It might help you there.
Yeah, well, and the Navy had a pretty good representation at that school, and man, there were some smart people. I mean, as you know, the Army and the Navy, we have a pretty good competitive rivalry going, and I assure you, there are studs and duds at MIT, and most of the studs are the Navy officers. Those are some smart.
So I want to move on to. Sorry, say it again.
I'd be in the dud category, in case your listeners were wondering.
I doubt that. So let's talk about the Corps. My recollection is that as the Army moved west in the 19th century, the middle of the 19th century, the Corps was very important. I don't know exactly when it was formed up, but it had a lot to do with crossing the continent and building infrastructure so as to enable the expansion of the country. And since then, it's been, instrumental in every war, every engagement, because it has the ability through not only design, but implementation of all these infrastructure projects. So can you tell us what the Corps does these days? Because I'm sure that its mission has changed since the day of the Conestoga wagon. Yeah.
Just a little bit. It's expanded. Some of those core competencies are still the same. Like you're speaking primarily there in terms of our history as our topographic abilities and mapping, cartography. That was something that we initially cut our teeth on, and certainly the military construction that we would do in those older campaigns. That was all engineer work, and we still are in that business with our GIS services and our military construction. But yes, the Corps of Engineers is our scope has increased. So in addition to construction for military purposes, defense purposes, we also do construction and design and planning for civil and public works. So those are your flood control projects, that's your environmental restoration. Additionally, we do environmental cleanup. So for instance, formerly used defense sites. Another lesser known thing about what the Corps does is we are the Army's realtor. So anytime that there's any land needed by the Army or to transition away from the Army, that normally falls into the Corps of Engineers. We do work for a lot of other agencies within the federal government, to include like the Veterans Affairs or National Security Agency here in Hawaii. Those are some of our stakeholders. And we have an emergency management function. And let's see what else. Oh, regulatory is an important function we provide, where we permit certain activities to ensure clean water and things of that nature. So all very related to water resources and advancing military readiness through infrastructure.
Many elements to that mission. And what strikes me is that we've come a long way since the Conestoga wagon. And your mission has, the mission of the Corps has, expanded, flowered out into so many areas. I mean, that's interesting about, the country's realtor. That's really interesting. And the regulation and, the infrastructure. But, query, in this period of time, the Corps has managed to hold on to and expand these various missions over, 175 years, however long it's been since it got started. And, one would think that some of these things would go to civilian organizations, either a civilian organization within the federal government or, outside the federal government on a contract basis. And I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, that you are in large part a civilian organization in the sense that you have a lot of civilian professionals working for you. But tell me, is that the way it should be? Or should some of this be, sort of factored out to other truly civilian organizations?
I do know that various administrations in the past have considered the role of the Corps of Engineers. Has it accreted too much? Has it grown too much? Or are there other federal agencies that could take on what we do? And I really just can't speak to that for lack of knowledge to it. But I think to answer maybe one of the core aspects of your curiosity is why a green suitor in charge? What is the makeup of the Corps of Engineers? We are like 95% civilian, Department of Army civilians, and we serve stakeholders outside of the Army. So in that way, we are just kind of a run-of-the-mill federal agency. We think a very, very good one. We feel like we provide a very nice place to work and a very important mission set. The reason why we are commanded by green suitors is another historical, factor. I think that as Army engineers, we are kind of nurtured and kind of educated to take on these types of responsibilities. A lot of times, the decisions that we have to make at my level in the districts are, they're controversial, and so it's nice to know. At least I think it's the case that in the Army and the military in general, I think there's a little bit more unbiased positions. It's a little bit more just what is the mission and what is the right thing to do. So that's the perspective that officers can bring. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you're asking, but I think that's why we are commanded by military officers.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me, because if you were within, say, industry itself, you'd be subject to pressures and private interests that might sway your decisions. If you're in the Corps, that's not so, and if you have green suits supervising you, it's really not so, and you have an independence, from the commercial world, which helps you remain independent in your decision process. I fully understand that. I think it's still good. But query, when I was practicing law, the Corps was always on our minds. Why? Because you were giving permits to very, very nearly every project that I can think of, especially around water, the shorelines, the reefs, navigable waters of the United States. It seems, as a lawyer practicing, that came up pretty often. And I wonder if that's changed and how it is today, and whether you are so hands-on about these various developments that are happening in Hawaii, and what your role is, and anyway, that's enough of a question for one question.
Yeah. Well, great question. And, our workforce that's involved with our regulatory program, they take their job really seriously. And it's they see their job as this dual-handed. On one hand, we want to protect the environment from the different, we'll call them evils or potential for misuse that can happen from development. But on the other hand, we want to facilitate development to the maximum extent possible, because landowners they own their land, and they should be allowed to develop their land, and we want to sustain economic development. It's a big part of what I feel like is something that brings me great gratification is that the Corps is a big part of the kind of infusing the economy in Hawaii. So the regulatory program, through their permitting, they try to do both of those things. It's a balancing act of preventing development that could be harmful to waters of the United States or navigable waters, and ensuring the clean enforcement of the Clean Water Act, along with our partners like the EPA, Fish and Wildlife Services. But on the other hand, allowing landowners and property owners and government agencies to develop, within those areas, protecting the environment as they do it.
One of the things you hear in Hawaii is that for a developer of anything, he's got to go through all these permits. And you could start with a dozen and go to 2 dozen if you like. And somewhere in there is the Corps. And some of the state agencies and county agencies are really, what shall I say, bureaucratic. They make you wait till the cows come home, and they run it around in a kind of serial rather than parallel approval process, which takes like forever. And developers go belly up because it takes so long. And I wonder what the Corps' view of that is. If you're on that list of a dozen or 200, a dozen or say 2 dozen, that's not in the hundreds, organizations that have to, pass on an approval, pass on a project, give an approval of some kind. Are you among the fastest, or in the middle, or the slowest? Where do you fit?
I have few experts working for me, and we have certain metrics and things that we look at on a monthly basis to ensure we're meeting our expectations. And it is a lot of timeliness that we're looking for. But what I think is really cool about what the Corps does, particularly my regulatory branch, is that they are frequently out among those other federal and state agencies that you're talking about, we'll call it the ecosystem of interested parties that are in the process of approving a development project. And my regulatory agency or branch is frequently out there forming relationships to try to streamline things as best as possible. And I'd like to just point out one thing that's really an example that's really pertinent, considering the major storm event that we just received here this past week here in Hawaii. And that's the fact that through great difficulties, or at least I should say they worked on it for a really long time, they created a blanket approval, a blanket permit, so that riverines can be maintained. And as most folks that live here know, that a lot of the rivers here in Hawaii have these sand plugs that need to be cleaned out so that the waters can go into the ocean after a major rain event. And if that doesn't happen, then it builds up and can create flooding, inland flooding and inundation. And so we worked with all of our state and federal partners here in Hawaii to allow that to be an easier process. It's a blanket approval now that they can go in and clean out the riverine deltas. And so that's just an example of how we do look for opportunities to streamline in ways that benefit the people of Hawaii.
Yeah, that's really, really important. Blanket approvals save so much time and cost, because every approval costs a developer a lot of money. So some of them can't afford it. The other thing that I am familiar with personally is the notion of condemnation. You said that the Corps is the Army's realtor. So if I'm in a federal agency and I come to you and say, Colonel Marshall, I need a little land here. I need a little land for this, that, or the other thing. Can you help me get the land? Now, in my day, it's a long time ago. In my day, the agency would go to the United States attorney for that district, and we'd say, can you initiate a condemnation action? And he would, or possibly wouldn't. He would make a decision about that, which I thought was very interesting. You'd think it would end with the agency saying, we want this, but it didn't always end that way. What role do you play today in condemnation actions on behalf of federal agencies?
Well, sir, I can tell you that right now I play zero role when it comes to that personally, because I had zero experience with that, and I don't think, to my knowledge, I don't think that we have very much role in that as well. I think that's more of a Department of Justice responsibility, but please, that is just my cursory knowledge of it.
No, it sounds like it hasn't changed. It sounds like it was the same as it was in my day, where the agency would go directly to the United States Attorney Department of Justice and work with, that office. And the Corps would be involved to evaluate, the land, so to speak, or the water, but not necessarily in the process of condemnation. It's good, it works. Now, the other thing you mentioned early on is your familiarity with business in Afghanistan, I think you said. And I have to say, this is, I'm fresh on this. You talk about the Corps Small Business Program. So can you tell us what that is and how the Corps works with business?
Sure. Thank you for the ask. And yeah, just to tie it back to that Afghanistan story, I mean, it really stokes my heartstrings role of industry and small businesses in particular to execute the mission of the Corps of Engineers. I mean, what you or your listeners might not realize is the Corps of Engineers doesn't have its own construction firm. We don't have laborers and tradesmen that can go out and do this work. We do have native engineers who can do design work, but even that capacity is limited. So we are wholly dependent on the industry base to execute the mission of our mission partners or of missions that we have been given directly. So I learned that firsthand as a young captain, and I learned to become dependent on my contractors. In some people's minds, a contract, that's a transactional relationship. And in the Corps, that is just not how, at least in my command, that's just not how we see things. That is a partnership, because we can't accomplish the mission of our partners or of our customers and stakeholders without the contracting base, without the contractor. Furthermore, when it comes to small business, I just have been impacted by a number of things in my life where I've really got a soft spot for the role of the small businessman or woman. I mean, they have a lot of challenges, and there's probably no better way to infuse an economy with a breath of life than to engage and mobilize that small business community. So the way the Corps of Engineers does that is, well, we've got small business goals, and a certain modicum of our portfolio, we are actually obligated by law to try to contract to small businesses. This year we've got a goal of about $100 million. That's over my obligatory amount. That's what I'm going for. Is over $100 million is going to be awarded to small business. That's our goal. So that's one way. But we do other things as well, or ways we might achieve that goal is we have different contracting vehicles. We call them MATOCs, which multiple award task order contracts. And in these, you can become maybe a pre-vetted or approved vendor, a preferred vendor, and we could get quick requirements through our customers, let's say the U.S. Army in Hawaii, and we'd be able to quickly send those contracts somewhere in the realm of 2 to 15, maybe up to $20 million to these small businesses that are on this contracting vehicle. And this is an exceptional service to our customers because we can rapidly contract, and then it also gives a lot of good work to small business partners. And what I'm really excited to report, because this just happened coincidentally, yesterday we awarded a $300 million small business MATOC, and we have 5 different small businesses here in Hawaii that are on that MATOC. And we're looking to offload $45 to $60 million just this fiscal year to those businesses. And that's just an example of the way that small business plays into our mission and why it's important to me. We've got other tools, or we call them tools, but vehicles that we're coming up with. A woman-owned small business, which is another type of small business category for us. We're looking at a small business MATOC for the county of Kauai primarily, to look at some possible work we have in the future there. And these are just great opportunities for small businesses in Hawaii.
What's that lighthouse behind you, Colonel? Is that on Kauai?
Well, no, that's the Makapuu Lighthouse.
Makapuu, okay.
And maybe you didn't know this, the Corps of Engineers built that. Lieutenant Slattery, a lieutenant, was the first district engineer over 125 years ago, built the lighthouse, and an important part of our mission is aiding navigation. So we have a lot of work in the harbor still to this day. We were the first to dredge and map out the the Honolulu Harbor. So just some nice history and the role the
It
Corps of
really is.
Engineers has played.
You have a
Here.
footprint everywhere, yeah. I'm thinking of this big project. It's hypothetical in some ways, but let's take the energy project at Schofield, which was a pretty big project. And Wärtsilä from Finland came in and they put in a lot of heavy equipment there. They're a shipbuilder, but they also do energy. And Hawaiian Electric was involved, big facility, and it serves Schofield, but it also, has the capacity to serve the community. Would the Corps have been involved in that, in reviewing the plans and organizing the contracting for it?
If there's an energy initiative for U.S. Army garrison to maybe I don't know, have more cleaner energy or maybe more efficient grid, then yeah, they could ask the Corps of Engineers, my district, to do a study, and we could contract that out to a subject matter expert or a consultant to work with. In order to develop some solutions for the garrison. So that's how it would normally work. On military bases, the Corps of Engineers don't normally own the projects. They're normally owned by the commanding general or the garrison commander. And so they would then come to the Corps as their construction and design agent. And that's, so we really work as kind of a contractor or an agent for them.
Yeah. So you're doing the professional work for them as you have been for a long, long time. A couple other things I want to catch up with you on, and that is COVID. COVID has affected everything in the world. I don't think we fully understand yet how much effect it has had. We're still finding out. And query, how has it affected the Corps of Engineers and your various partners in the community?
Hey, thanks for asking, Jay. And I like the way you asked that question too. I am thinking a lot about how the effects of COVID could be continuing to affect us maybe months and years after the actual pandemic is over. That's a very interesting idea. But what I can say, and this is something I'm pretty excited about, in FY20 or 2020, which ended for our fiscal year ends in September of 2020, we actually executed on a much higher level than the previous year. I mean, so in FY19, we expended about $380 million. So in FY20, we expended $440 million. So that's an increase of $60 million during the pandemic. And so what that says is that we actually didn't skip a beat. That the pandemic, while it was impactful to a lot of people, and our hearts went out to them, the construction industry actually did okay. And there's a lot of leaders that we can thank for that, to allow us to keep our tradesmen on the job and working. So the pandemic did not really affect us in 2020. And as we project forward in 21, we're projecting even a higher year. So if last year was 440, this year we're looking at, and the numbers are still preliminary, but over 450 million in expenditures. Oh, that's funds that go straight into the economy, not only of Hawaii, but also our other places we work, like the U.S. territories in the Pacific.
You're all over the Pacific then. You're in Asia Pacific in general. How far does your jurisdiction go?
Yeah, thanks for asking. We actually cover all the U.S. territories. So I guess as far west as that is the Commonwealth and Northern Marianas Islands. We also have we have Guam, and we have American Samoa. So that's really far south and west. And then we have also work going on in the Federated States of Micronesia, the Republic of Marshall Islands with Kwajalein Atoll primarily. It's a big important footprint for the Army. And so we are spread over, that's all of our jurisdiction.
You must do plenty of travel, at least in ordinary times, eh?
Yeah, I'm definitely not getting those perks of this job, during the pandemic, but that's okay. I would say that the pandemic has affected our ability to do some work in those areas. We cannot communicate as easily, and the logistics are very challenging, particularly in the Republic of Marshall Islands on Kwajalein Atoll. Business is done differently there, and it is hard to maintain our throughput of construction with the policies in place there right now.
So, the Corps is in a great place when you're talking about federal spending for infrastructure. And, you know, right now, President Joe Biden is saying he wants to do infrastructure. I have a feeling you're going to hear about that, about all the infrastructure that he has, you know, planned or wants to do. But I'm thinking also that the core is, as suggested by this discussion, the core is close to the civilian business community. Now, I would expect, for example, and I know this because I've been a judge in, you know, engineering, professional engineering meetings, and I saw lots of members of the core at these meetings, because engineer versus, you know, engineer with engineer, it's a professional kind of connection in the engineering societies and so forth. So there's a connection between the core and, you know, engineering and building and, you know, infrastructure in general. But, you know, we have the prospect of bad weather, extreme weather, of sea level rise, the erosion of our beaches, which is kind of your jurisdiction, beaches. And I imagine in the years to come, there'll be big projects, either on a long-term basis or on a very expedited basis because of extreme weather, in which you will have to get involved to help rebuild the state and make the state more resilient. There's so many issues about that, and there'll be more coming. What is your involvement? What is your thought about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, just to quickly connect with your first thought there, you know, yeah, we're a federal agency, and I'm a, you know, Southern boy from Greensboro, North Carolina, but my workforce and myself personally, we feel a deep connection to our local community here, and I really hope that rings true. And if you ever interact with any of us, I'm sure that you will get the same feeling. And so the threats that you're speaking about there that affect the state of Hawaii and our other, you know, stakeholders in the territories, we feel that too. I mean, those are our homes as well. Those are our friends, those are our neighbors, people we go to church with. And so we are in the community, and we feel deeply about the mission because it also affects us. So when you talk about, you know, the terms that you use there in the Corps of Engineers, we use the term climate preparedness and resilience. And what's really interesting is the Honolulu district has been doing this for a long time. We really are, you know, like, because we are very closely tethered to our partners, like, we know that is a value set here. We see the beach erosion that's happening on the North Shore and on the South Shore. We understand the connection to the Aina here, and so we are very sensitive to that. We've been doing this for a while. So the nice thing about what you're bringing up is the new administration possibly might liberate some funding to do more work. And I really can't speak to what that might look like, but I can tell you that my district is excited about providing any services for climate preparedness and resilience that might come up. What that might look like, or in our designs, we have to design certain features with the expectation of sea level rise. And we use our, you know, we have models that are somewhat proprietary that predict that. And that's just an example of how we can, you know, integrate our science with our designs in support of the people that we care so much about.
Lovely to talk to you, really, Eric. I'm so happy I met you and we had this conversation. You know, there's two kinds of people in the world. You know, one is the kind you want to have a beer with, and the other is you don't. And you're the kind of guys I would like to have a beer with.
I'm really glad you finished the sentence that way, because that would be super awkward otherwise. But likewise, Jay, I mean, we're scratching the surface on a lot of stuff, and I know I'm speaking vaguely, but I tell you, I'm excited about the mission ahead for the state of Hawaii that we have in the Corps of Engineers here. There's a lot of good work, and my workforce is passionate about serving this community. So I represent them. I wish they could all be here and say the same things to you.
Well, thank you very much, Eric. Thank you for giving us the time, and thank you for the conversation and the candor. And I hope we can do it again soon. And I look forward to that.
Get that beer, sir.
That too. Aloha.